This is the dark and twisted story of Resident Evil 9's main villain, Victor Gideon, a man who believed humanity was unfinished. While others saw Umbrella as a catastrophe, Gideon saw it as a beginning, being the foundation of Oswald E. Spencer's vision for forced human evolution. And once Umbrella fell, he refused to let that vision die. From pushing ethical limits with disturbing underground experiments, to partnering with the Connections to research clones of Grace, all the way to silencing anyone who dared to uncover his operation, Victor Gideon would stop at nothing to finish what Spencer had started, only to discover that he had been chasing a lie the entire time. Victor first made a name for himself as a researcher within the Umbrella Corporation. During his time there, he helped work on the development of the T-Virus, the same virus that would later spiral out of control and destroy Racoon City. But unlike scientists like William Birkin or Albert Wesker, Gideon wasn't driven by ego or a hunger for power. His loyalty came from something deeper. Gideon truly believed in Umbrella's founder Oswald E. Spencer. He didn't just respect him, he believed in his vision. Spencer had spent his life chasing one goal, which was forcing humanity into its next stage of evolution. Before Spencer's death, one of the final projects he worked on was known as Elpis, which Gideon believed was a virus that would help usher in the next stage of human evolution, as this goal was Spencer's throughout his entire life. Because of this, Gideon would become eager to obtain Elpis and carry out Spencer's vision. After Umbrella's fall and Racoon City's destruction, a criminal organization known as the Connections discovered ARC, an underground facility beneath the Racoon City orphanage, missile-proof and functioning as a research laboratory. It housed every virus, experiment, and infection developed up to that point. And above all of them was Elpis, which was protected by an anti-intrusion mechanism that would destroy Elpis if the wrong move was made. At some point, after digging through much of Spencer's research, the Connections eventually realized that Grace Ashcroft was seemingly the key to freeing Elpis. Using Grace's genetic information, the Connections began creating clones of her. They also hired Victor Gideon, financing his clinical hospital to begin research and providing him with Grace's medical records and, more importantly, her genetic data. As Victor began further research into the T-Virus and Elpis, he came across some shocking discoveries, with the first being what he called Racoon City Syndrome. Among the survivors of the Racoon City outbreak, Gideon identified what he described as a delayed reaction to the T-Virus, something that didn't appear immediately but slowly developed over time. According to his report, small traces of the virus remained inside survivors' bodies. Over the years, those traces could mutate on their own, and when they did, the results were devastating. At first, the symptoms were mild: fatigue, pain, and discoloration under the skin. But as the condition progressed, black marks began spreading across the entire body. Movement became difficult, the pain intensified, and weakness began to set in. Once in the later stages, victims began vomiting blood uncontrollably, and once the final stage began, death usually followed within 1 to 2 hours. Gideon spent much time trying to search for a cure for Racoon City Syndrome, but he was never able to find one. Aside from this discovery, Victor also learned of a mutated strain of the T-Virus. According to Spencer's notes, repeated mutations of the virus could cause a different kind of reaction inside the body. Instead of completely destroying the host's mind, this strain altered the blood in a way that preserved parts of the person. This allowed subjects infected with the mutated strain to keep their habits, their personality, and even parts of their memory from their past lives. Further notes mention how memories from one individual could be transferred to another. Blood wasn't just tissue, it carried biological information connected to memory, and because the T-Virus allowed control over the body at a cellular level, it might be possible to use it to pass those traits on. However, for such a procedure to succeed, the host must be able to withstand the toxicity of the mutated T-Virus strain, while preserving their own intelligence. Sourcing viable subjects was key to future research and testing. With this new information, Victor quietly continued his work beneath the surface of the care center. In the underground and confidential areas, he carried out further testing with the T-virus, seeking to uncover more about Elpis while advancing the virus's evolution and its memory transfer capabilities. As new patients arrived at the care center, a pattern quickly emerged. Those without family, without advocates, without anyone likely to question their disappearance were taken and forced into brutal experimentation with the mutated T-virus strain. The underground facility revealed the full extent of the operation. Jail cells lined the walls, confining patients with no explanation and no hope of release. They were kept there until they were needed. Those who died were placed onto a conveyor system, processed, and fed into a massive industrial shredder, reduced to nothing as part of the facility's routine disposal procedure. But then eventually, Victor shifted his focus. He became convinced that Grace's genetics were the missing component needed to stabilize the mutated T-virus strain. One persistent flaw remained. Every infected subject mutated uncontrollably. Victor believed clones of Grace would prove more resilient than the ordinary patients he had experimented on. Acting on that belief, he began extracting blood from patients infected with the strain, harvesting it while the virus remained active, and injecting it into the clone bodies of Grace. In a file recovered from the underground lab, a chilling entry details the scale of the experimentation, mentioning a small refined sample had been extracted from 500 liters of blood and collected from 115 infected patients. That concentrated sample was administered to Marie, designated Subject 170. Initial observations noted increased physical resilience. For a brief moment, it appeared promising, but the improvement did not last. She failed to withstand the toxicity of the mutated T-virus strain. Her body destabilized, and she mutated beyond recognition, eventually breaking free from her holding cell. The strain was administered to 2 different clones. Each time, the outcome was the same. Their bodies could not endure the virus's toxicity, causing them to mutate uncontrollably and transform into grotesque, twisted, unrecognizable forms. After 2 decades of research, the documented number of tests reached 171 subjects, with Emily being recorded as the last one. But no matter what they tried, none of them were able to unlock Elpis. Every subject received the same designation, being a complete failure. Victor altered formulas, adjusted dosages, and modified the viral strain. But no matter what he changed, Elpis never awakened. And still, he refused to stop searching. In 2018, everything changed. Victor and the Connections became aware that someone was actively attempting to expose their operation, and that person was Alyssa Ashcroft. Recognizing the threat she posed, they moved quickly. An infected assassin was dispatched with a single objective: locate and eliminate her. On October 18th, Alyssa documented how she noticed a hooded man watching her. The encounter unsettled her, but she could not yet confirm her suspicions. But then the following day, she documented being followed again by the same exact man. At that point, she understood the truth. She and her daughter Grace were being hunted. Alyssa did everything she could to remain hidden and protect her child. But then, on the 3rd night, disaster struck. While staying at the Wrenwood Hotel, Alyssa returned to their room and greeted Grace. Moments later, they received a phone call, and once Grace answered, there was only silence. Then, right after, the power goes out. Alyssa immediately realized what was happening. This was no coincidence. Whoever had been following her had found them. Without hesitation, Alyssa began escorting Grace out of the building, hoping to escape before it was too late. Then, once they reached the lower level, they were stopped by a hotel staff member who assured them that the outage was likely caused by an issue with the old electrical box. But that reassurance only lasted seconds, as the hooded man appears and kills the staff member without warning. Alyssa reacted instantly, firing multiple shots at the attacker and forcing him backwards into a nearby room, where she then managed to lock him inside, buying some precious time for her and Grace to escape. Grabbing Grace, the two ran, desperate to get out of the building. But sadly, they didn't make it. The hooded assassin re-emerged and took Alyssa out. Then the attacker finally succumbed to his own gunshot injuries and collapsed. As he fell, he knocked over a lamp, and flames quickly began to spread all over the building. In the chaos, Grace held her mother's lifeless body in her arms, screaming as the building burned around them. Due to documentation later uncovered at the care center, it was revealed that Victor acted swiftly in the aftermath of the incident. Shortly after the fire at the Wrenwood Hotel, Victor dispatched a cleanup team to the scene. Their objective was clear: erase every trace of the connection's involvement. All remaining witnesses at the hotel were eliminated. The body of the infected assassin was recovered, and any materials or physical evidence that could be traced back to Victor or the connections were systematically removed. By the time authorities were left to assess the destruction, nothing remained that could directly tie the events back to the connections. After the events of 2018, Grace remained in hiding for years, until she eventually joined the FBI. That decision ultimately exposed her location. Victor became aware of her whereabouts and began observing her movements, stalking her for an entire week without her knowledge. During this same period, a documented meeting took place between Zeno and Gideon, where they discussed Gideon's most recent research findings. Shortly after this, events were set into motion. Grace was assigned to investigate a death at the Wrenwood Hotel, the same location where her mother had been killed years earlier. The assignment was no coincidence. Victor himself was responsible for the death. It had been orchestrated specifically to lure Grace back to the hotel. As he had planned, Grace arrived to the hotel and began to explore, eventually coming face to face with Victor at the upper levels of the building. Recognizing the danger, Grace attempted to flee, but Victor managed to grab her with ease and began to strangle her, causing Grace to lose consciousness. Shortly after, Victor carried Grace over his shoulder and made his way into the streets. As he turned, he realized that Leon S. Kennedy had spotted him. Without hesitation, Victor injected T-Virus into nearby civilians, and within moments, they began to mutate, transforming into infected creatures. The chaos forced Leon to engage the growing threat, diverting his attention away from Victor. And this tactic ultimately worked. Leon was occupied with fending off the infected, and Victor disappeared from sight. From there, he transported Grace to the care center, restrained her, and began a series of medical procedures. Progress notes later recovered detailed the steps he took. He extracted her blood, monitored her pulse, administered Dexafil medication, and ultimately recorded that she was stable and ready for further examination. Shortly after this, Victor sent a message to the care center's chairman. In it, he warned of Leon's imminent arrival. He instructed the chairman to initiate Code 6 at 11:30 p.m., stating that he had achieved his objective and no longer required the hospital. Code 6 meant a full lockdown and the deliberate infection of the entire care center. Numerous internal notes document the horrifying events that followed. One folded note, written by a staff member, describes hearing distant screams echoing through the halls and witnessing colleagues turn on one another in a violent confusion. Another entry, believed to be a final message from a different staff member, states that everyone else was already dead, that she was the last one alive. She attempted to escape, but failed. In her final words, she describes watching her co-workers being eaten alive, the images replaying in her mind like an endless loop that she could not escape. Shortly after the outbreak within the care center, Victor encountered Leon once again. This time, he approached him calmly and suggested they chat. Leon refused and immediately attempted to neutralize him, but Victor moved faster. He disarmed Leon with ease and overpowered him, wrapping his hands around Leon's throat. As Leon struggles for air, Victor remarks that he suffered from what he called Racoon City syndrome, and moments later, Leon lost consciousness. Later, at another point during the chaos, Grace entered one of the offices where Victor was present, and she reacted with immediate hostility. Victor, by contrast, remained composed. He began explaining that she was unique, and that through her, Elpis could finally be set free. During their conversation, Phase 2 of Victor's plan was activated, and the effects were immediate, showing how infected patients within the isolation ward began to awaken. Taking advantage of the distraction, Grace fled the room and hid. Victor pursued her, but eventually lost track of her location. Now frustrated, he lets out an angry scream shouting Grace's name before abandoning the search. Sometime after this, Victor wakes Leon up and begins an interrogation process, but Leon refused to cooperate. Instead of engaging in conversation, he forced his way out of the chair and delivered a powerful kick, knocking Victor backward. Leon begins to open fire, causing Victor to retreat and escape once again. Later, while investigating the laboratory beneath the care center, Grace witnessed another critical moment. Victor entered the lab, unaware that she was nearby, and hidden from view, Grace overheard his conversation with Zeno. During the exchange, Victor confirmed that all tests conducted on Grace had come back positive. According to him, she was the key to Elpis. Declaring that he no longer required the Elpis research lab, Victor initiated the facility's self-destruct sequence before exiting the room. Following the activation of the self-destruct sequence, Grace runs into both Victor and Zeno. She was taken aboard a helicopter, and the three departed for Racoon City, the exact location where Elpis was housed. During their flight, Victor learned that Leon had entered Racoon City and was actively pursuing them. Leon's continued interference had now escalated into a direct threat to their plans. So, upon landing, Victor immediately began preparing for a final confrontation. Determined to eliminate Leon once and for all, he armed himself with rockets and deployed dog BOWs in anticipation of Leon's arrival. What followed was a high-speed pursuit through the streets of Racoon City. Victor and Leon engaged in an intense motorcycle chase as they raced towards the RPD building. Victor repeatedly attempted to stop Leon, blocking routes, creating obstacles, and deploying attacks designed to slow him down. Each time, Leon managed to recover and close the distance. The chase ultimately reached its climax when Leon hurled his hatchet at Victor's motorcycle. The strike damaged the bike, causing a gas leak, and that's when the two faced each other one final time. In the end, Leon's precision shooting proved decisive. His gunfire ignited the leaking fuel, triggering an explosion that destroyed Victor's motorcycle and sent him plunging over the edge of a cliff. From then on, Victor does not reappear until the closing moments of the game. At that point, Grace reveals the truth about Elpis. Spencer had ultimately regretted everything he had done. Contrary to long-standing assumptions, he didn't create Elpis as a weapon. It was developed as an antiviral, intended to cure the T-virus. Just then, Victor arrives and pieces things together. He determines that their research on Spencer's work had been incomplete, and that there was no connection between Grace and Emily and the 170 other clones that had been created. Despite this revelation, Victor chooses to align himself with Spencer's final decision. He resolves to carry out what he interprets as Spencer's vision, bringing chaos to the world. Zeno, however, reacts with open anger, furious that he had invested so much time and money into a flawed pursuit. After Zeno ridicules both him and Spencer, Victor reaches his breaking point and kills him. He then retrieves a sample of Elpis and activates the lab's self-destruct sequence. As the facility collapses, Victor, Leon, and Grace fall into the depths below, where Leon confronts Victor in one final battle. As the battle intensifies and Victor sustains significant damage, he mutates further into a nemesis-like form, revealing that he had actually been implanted with the NE alpha parasite. After a prolonged and brutal confrontation, Leon ultimately destroys the creature using his Requiem hand cannon, finally bringing the conflict to its end. Victor spent his entire life chasing a lie. He believed he was finishing Spencer's vision, continuing the T-virus research, unlocking Elpis, and guiding humanity toward the evolution Spencer had promised. He was certain he was finishing what Umbrella started, fulfilling a destiny the world was too blind to see. but the truth was far simpler. Elpis was never the key to transcendence, and Spencer's vision was never what Victor believed it to be. And in the end, after decades of obsession and sacrifice, Victor Gideon wasn't remembered as the architect of a new world, but as a man who devoted his life to a lie. Click this video here to learn more about Resident Evil 9's lore. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.